Mr. Ambassador, thank you for visiting us here and talking to KoSSev and our audience.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me back.
Quite many events happening between since we last time spoke here 4 years ago. As an ambassador, would you have this kind of feeling in what direction things would turn?
No, I don't think so. I mean, goodness me, when I arrived 4 years ago, I think we were in a very different conversation at the time. I mean, obviously a lot has happened in that time for all of us with COVID, for all of us in terms of relationships in the region, what's happening in Ukraine, all of that is really very important. And if anything, what we're seeing, well, I would say particularly over the last year, is that the Western Balkans as a whole are becoming an area of greater interest, an area of greater concern. And obviously the events in Kosovo over the last few weeks have really highlighted that. So this isn't an easy time. It's not one that one would forecast, but there we are.
So speaking of concerns, are the current Kosovo government and Prime Minister Kuri a destabilizing factor not only in Kosovo but throughout the region, considering the situation when both the EU and the United States, presumably Great Britain, you can tell us more, see him as someone who disagrees with their repeated call. Also, I have to add here that neither Serbs in general, both here in Kosovo and Serbia, nor the Kosovo opposition agree to the actions of Kosovo government.
I mean, I think, ultimately you have to recognise that Prime Minister Kuri and his government are democratically elected. They've now been in power for over 2 years. They've established themselves domestically, and they've also probably, not to their regret, but certainly to their kind of frustration, been forced to deal with some of these international issues that are a priority to us. And the dialogue has always been one of those. Establishing normalisation with Serbia really ought to be a priority. And what we've seen, particularly in the last year, is a whole series of events, a whole series of issues that have really only been difficult and frustrating. I think for many of us in the international community, in the Quint, we very much hoped that the progress in the spring towards the Ohrid Agreement, towards the implementation annex, would have created a space in which many different issues could be dealt with, and that we were into a different direction and a different momentum. Unfortunately, that isn't where we are. And I think we have to recognise that the unilateral action on the 26th of May by the Kosovan government to forcefully install mayors in the municipal offices has changed the parameters of the issue. And in some ways, I think, has made things much more difficult. That need not necessarily mean that Kosovo and the Kosovan government are a destabilizing factor within the region. But that action, I think, has certainly been destabilizing in terms of relationships within this community, but in the broader communities within Kosovo as well. And I think for many international partners, there remains a question of why that was necessary. And I think whilst there are clearly discussions at the moment around how to, well, if not contain the situation, move to resolve it, I think it's going to take quite a long time to do that. And there lies the risks, because we're in an unstable security situation as well.
We've seen that there are still some important international efforts, including restrictive measures, first coming from the US General on this Europe Defender 2023. Then we saw European measures, and we also heard Germany announcing some particular restrictive measures against Kosovo. Is there anything that the British government also did on this behalf to join its partners?
No, there hasn't been specifically. I mean, we have looked at what measures we could take And so we are aware of the things that we could do. Prime Minister Kuri was in London just under 2 weeks ago and saw the Foreign Secretary while he was there. I was at that meeting.
What messages did he receive?
So as I say, the Foreign Secretary is very clear. We expect Prime Minister Kuri and his government and his security authorities to de-escalate the situation.
Meaning?
Exactly. The meaning is the most important bit. I think it's very clear in our minds that means municipal mayors not necessarily having to work from municipal buildings. We don't believe that that's necessary. More importantly, I think it's also that the special police units do not have a role in the centres of population. They should not be used as regular police. There is a real opportunity to allow that responsibility to lie with the regular police force. The special police have particular training. That is not served by them looking after empty buildings. And I think in terms of removing a point of friction, it's very important for those special police units not just to be reduced, but actually to be moved out of the centres of population.
And sent where? Visible to the population, or?
I mean, any police unit is likely to be visible to the population at some point.
But we talk of special police.
But special police units are trained for special tasks. That's why they are equipped in the way that they are. That's why they may have a certain behaviour that is simply not appropriate in other situations. And I think all of that really needs to be taken into consideration. There is a role for KFOR, but KFOR is not a police force. There is a role for ULEX, and I think I'd like to, it's perhaps a little cheeky as the British ambassador to say that, we want to see more from ULEX, but I think that's necessary. I think this is a space in which the nature of policing is very important. Unsurprisingly, it would be better if the Kosovo Serb police had not left last November. It would be better.
But here we are.
But I was going to say, and in the same way, I would say the same about the judiciary and the prosecution. If you want to establish rule of law in the north of Kosovo, it requires the police, it requires the judiciary, it requires the prosecution. And I don't believe they can simply come from south of the Ibar.
So do you think that the situation will de-escalate in the next 2 weeks, as was not only requested but obviously agreed in Bratislava the other day?
So my concern is specificity. I think it's a good step politically to see that Kosovo is ready to take measures or to move towards it. But we have to see that happen. I mean, we, along with other international partners, along with KFOR, have looked very closely at the presence of the police in the north. It's very much monitored. And I very much hope that over the next few days, next week, we'll be able to actually judge whether or not there has been a reduction.
This has been confirmed by the Deputy Police Commander, that the plan is being implemented and 25% of the agreed portion of police have withdrawn from the police building.
Yes.
However, we do lack information on specificities, as you said. First, how many troops are in the buildings themselves, how many troops left the buildings, which buildings, which municipalities, where did they go? Also, there is one contradictory part, if I may put that way, that what we saw was published both by Mr. Bislimi and what was confirmed by the EU on the elements agreed a few days ago in Bratislava, almost the very same day or the day after, the Prime Minister Kuri added one important detail. Special police troops are not leaving Kosovo. Special troops that are leaving the buildings will be sent to the required places in other, throughout North Kosovo.
Yeah.
So how do you understand that? Or do you understand that these kind of information do not help Serbian population to calm down their fears, concerns, psychological stress, physical fear, etc.?
The United Kingdom has a long experience of difficult policing situations because of our experience in Northern Ireland, where the police are playing a multiple of roles in situations between different communities where there are tensions and there is violence. And so a lot of what I've seen in the north has reminded me of that. And it's why I say I think what we really need is not just to perhaps focus on percentages or words of encouragement. What we really need to understand is the impact of the behaviour of the police on the community, how that can be modified, and also how that can be changed. My concern, I think, at the moment, as you mentioned, is the specificity of everything. A certain percentage is a good way to go, in that it looks as if it will be a reduction. But as we say in English, the devil is in the detail. Yeah. Who, where, when, on what basis, where do they go? I mean, as you know, the UK's position is very much that the special police units should be able to operate in the north. There are particular tasks that I think, in terms of crime, smuggling, trafficking, are issues that the community in the north wants to be addressed in any case.
But do I understand you correctly? You yourself do lack the details on what was agreed in.
At the moment, we only have the details that everybody has seen.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned, interestingly enough, the Northern Ireland. I have to ask you one question here. Do you think that the trust between the communities can be regained by regaining control over territory by police troops?
No, I think there are many other issues involved. I think trust between communities is probably at its lowest now that it's been for a long time, certainly within my time here. And I think although there are elements within the Kosovan government that are working hard to try and build trust between the communities, ultimately the politics, unilateral actions, the escalations that we've seen, mean that we're in a very difficult situation. My fear is very much for the next couple of months, because many of the proposed solutions around new municipal elections, around a reduction in police forces and such, these may take time. And time isn't necessarily the best friend of the current instability.
To what extent you are fearful of future potential conflicts, ethnic conflicts, etc.?
Well, I think the issue is, well, not to be fearful, but to be aware of the risks. I'm not sure I would describe them as, I think the risk is when you talk about, ethnic conflict, it becomes much greater than it is. And the reality is we're living in a small society, whether that's Kosovo as a whole or whether that's the 4 northern municipalities. But what that means is there is a greater level of sensitivity, and small things can really matter. Small incidents, small misunderstandings can cause greater effect. And that's what I'm actually afraid of, because you cannot control everything. Not all the actors are controlled. There is a random and chaotic element to any conflict situation at whatever level. And I feel we're in that space.
Speaking of, as you said, small incidents, we've already seen 2 of them for the past few days. Here I don't want to prejudge any ethnical background, but I'll just mention the 2 of them. Serbian Returnica to Zariozic's house was set on fire in Istok this week, in one village of Istok, although the US ambassador visited the very scene and sending a strong message from there. And then it was followed by the visit of Kosovan Interior Minister as well. This is pretty much deja vu, something that we've been seeing on constant basis over, 20 years over. So again, as without any kind of wishing to prejudge the ethnic context to that, but an incident would occur, a criminal act, etc. Officials are there, sending very strong messages, strong condemnations, asking for hasty, fast investigations, promising results, and then nothing happens, and then again we have another incident. The question, Mr. Ambassador, here is what kind of message does such a reality send to Kosovo Serbian community in particular, but also Kosovan society as a whole?
Well, it comes back to what you mentioned with trust. Ultimately, at the moment, we appear to be in a situation where everybody is not just reacting sensitively, but almost fearfully. And everybody believes they are trying to protect themselves in some way. I wholeheartedly agree with what the US ambassador did and said. This kind of action can only be condemned. As you say, there's an investigation and we'll find out what happened. But even so, the fact that we are afraid that this is ethnically motivated is a problem. And that ought not to be the vision of what Kosovo is about. Kosovo needs to be about much more. Kosovo is not about one ethnicity. It's about more than that. And if it wishes to be a modern, liberal, democratic society, it needs to find a way of getting beyond what appear to be ethnically motivated crimes. I mean, obviously people like me want to see reconciliation, want to see people get over the history of the past. It's not easy to do that. All participants, if you like, not stakeholders, need to recognise, need to acknowledge what had happened. That isn't to kind of create some kind of clean slate. It's really about acknowledging realities, acknowledging facts, so that everybody, and I'm not going to, you can talk about communities, you can talk about societies, you can talk about nation states, but ultimately it's about individual people, individual families, being able to move on in their lives, maybe forgiving, maybe accepting, maybe not. Human emotion has a whole range, but at least to find a space to move on together.
You mentioned acknowledging reality. You also mentioned individual cases. Speaking of acknowledging reality, is Kosovo a multi-ethnic society for you? Because acknowledging reality is that we speak of 90%, up to 93% of Albanian population. And how did we come into that situation is that two, I would say, thirds of Kosovo Serbian population has never returned to Kosovo immediately after the war. So the double of population, more than double population, is still outside of Kosovo. We are talking about Serbian IDPs. They've never returned to Kosovo. So is Kosovo as such, can Kosovo as such be a success story?
I mean, I think Kosovo can be a success story. It feels at the moment as if everything is weighted against that. I mean, that's not just an issue of minorities not returning. We as an embassy have tried to work on helping some families to do so. It's also, to be honest, an issue for the Balkans as a whole, where we're seeing the demographies change, where people are just leaving because of what is the future? And I think that, ultimately, again, for the situation we're in at the moment is, what is the future that is wanted? And that is a question that I ask the Kosovan government, but I would ask all the communities, what is the Kosovo you want to live in? How can we as international partners help you create that? We have some very hard issues at the moment, clearly. You know, the security situation in the north is a hard issue that we need to contain or resolve in a way that ensures no more people are hurt. There's not the risk of people being killed. But ultimately, at the moment, those are risks we're living with.
Did you hear about the case the other day around what happened to an 80-year-old Serbian man here in Leposavić area village? Kosovo police bursted into yard of an 80-year-old man because he was wearing shaikacha, a Serbian traditional hat, and he lifted up his hat as a sign, a very generous sign to greet anyone who would pass by his road or house. So a police officer burst into his yard. They told him that they felt provoked by doing him as such, and he should not be putting the cap on the hat. I have to here be, reserve and tell you that we were witnessed that by the family. Police didn't have that kind of information because the case obviously was not reported, at least not when we talked to them. When we asked the family why they did not report a case to police, they told us that they felt extremely anxious, humiliated, concerned, disoriented, not knowing what to do. Because what kind of police, what rights do we have? We were attacked on our doorstep. So these were very bitter testimonies from the family. Did you show any personal interest into the case? And do you understand if the whole case proves as such, what that individual case has potentials for a long-term damage if the two communities first do not understand each other and special police troops can exercise this kind of discrimination acts towards the populations they were supposed to take care of?
I think it comes back to what we were talking earlier about levels of trust, but also levels of sensitivity. You know, there are a variety of symbols, actions that can be taken, which at the moment are seen as provocations when they really are not. Everybody is really kind of very nervous, very worried, very sensitive. And I think what will happen, and this is the kind of misunderstanding that is a real risk and a real danger.
What if it's deliberate, hypothetically?
I think for it to be deliberate, it would mean that the policemen were driving along and were targeting somebody in a particular hat. I think that's unlikely. This sounds, but
No, not deliberate. I mean, when I say deliberate,
yes.
what if they really understood what the man did, but it was really an interethnic issue? They were not happy with this kind of showing respect.
But perhaps they don't see it as a sign of respect. They see
That's what they told. They clearly said it was provocation.
They see it as something else.
So if that turns out to be the case?
Well, this doesn't mean that behaviour is acceptable. You know, this is the difference as well in terms of both sides, both communities needing to understand what is the response to what they do. Now, you are quite right to put the onus of that responsibility on the police. They're an authority of the state. They have a responsibility to a community. And so, of course, they should be thinking through their actions. Unfortunately, as I say, I think at the moment, because of how things have played out over the last few weeks, each community is very much on edge. But I would completely agree. It's for the police to be thinking about their own behaviour when they are interacting with the public. You know, leave aside the questions around demonstrations and protesters.
So let's switch to the responsibility of the UK and switch to your domestic yard. Your ambassador to Kosovo, your compatriot, Miss Alicia Kearns, recently said in the British Parliament that British soldiers witnessed the smuggling of weapons from Serbian ambulances into the facilities of the Serbian Orthodox Church here in Kosovo. KFOR said that they had no such an information. The very next day, when they actually message hit the press, you met with Bishop Theodosia, and from what was reported, you said you conveyed your message in quite a different tone. As the ambassador in the place about which Miss Alicia Kearns made such very serious allegations in the British Parliament, as I said, do you have the same information? Or to put in a very blunt way, did British KFOR soldiers report on smuggling of arms from ambulances into the SOC facilities?
So we'd be very clear. The UK government shares KFOR's position. We don't have evidence that the Serbian Orthodox Church is involved with smuggling arms across the border from Serbia. Ms Kearns is an independent, well, Conservative MP. She's not a member of the government. She does have a very important role as the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and she does take a great interest in what is happening, not just in Kosovo, but in the Balkans as a whole. But in terms of that specific allegation, we do not have that information. We do not have that evidence.
So did I understand that this still might have happened, or that the British soldiers did not report on that?
I think we are talking about an issue which is a broad and serious issue.
Yes.
There are clearly arms that come across the border. We've raised that with the government in Belgrade. You know, we talked to the government in Pristina. We talked to KFOR about that. But in terms of this specific allegation, we do not have the evidence that this is what is happening.
Ms. Alicia Kearns, who is, as you said, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, but she also came from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Is there any procedure that she, as coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, could not come public with such serious allegations without prior filtering her message to the Foreign Office? Not
at all. I mean, Alicia Kearns is a British MP. As such, she is independent of government, and she has the right to put forward her views within Parliament. That's what she did. You know, this is not information that she's received from the UK government. It's not information that somehow has filtered through the Foreign Office. Yes, she has worked with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office before. I think she's worked with the Ministry of Defence as well, as elsewhere. But in terms of this particular allegation, this is really her responsibility.
Mr. Ambassador, there are still a plethora of issues I would like to ask you, but we have to limit this interview. Is there any issue that I didn't ask you and you would like to convey any message to specifically Serbian community? I'm pretty sure that you are aware that it's specifically after what Ms. Kearns raised recently, that didn't help to improve image of the UK in wider Serbian population.
No, but I mean, you know, my business is only part about the image of the UK. You know, my job is really about the UK, its work with Kosovo, Kosovo's communities. You know, as I've said before, I'm sure I said this when I first spoke to you. You know, I'm the British ambassador to all the communities in Kosovo, not just to the government. And I think it's very important. We are at a very difficult time. I think it's important that everybody thinks carefully and acts carefully. I think there needs to be consideration for the future. Personally, I think we need to find a different way forward. I don't think we can simply go back to what existed before. And I think that will only come about through cooperation between the international community, the two governments in Belgrade and Pristina, but also with the community here. And I think it's very important that the community here look at how they can put forward their voice into a lot of these conversations. You know, often in terms of international negotiation, it happens in capitals. And yet I think with this situation, we really need to be closer to the ground and to be hearing from the community about what they want their future to be?
The community here in the north, but I believe it's not even much different when it comes to the Serbian community in the south. They do share for quite a long time a feeling that they have been voiceless towards both the international community and Kosovo government.
Then it's for them to find a voice.
How?
Again, I don't think the international should be telling you how. I think you should be working it out for yourselves.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for talking to KoSSev today.
Pleasure.